another action-packed video for the course. So, so what we see is kind of a different view. When I was interviewing Brendan, I was surprised to find out that Microsoft had tried to purchase Netscape, and it didn't work. And once Microsoft was spurned, then they came after him. And there's a couple things that happen. You see amazing creativity. JavaScript kind of came out of the crucible of all that tension. You know, it was done, and so the problem is that Netscape was sort of doomed, right? They didn't have deep enough pocketbook to compete with Microsoft. Microsoft was going to be able to bring the fight to them. Microsoft was going to give away the browser, and so Netscape slowly but surely sank, right? They had a lot of money, things were going well, but the future was not bright for them. And so one of the things that Netscape had done early on is in some way to placate their the people who thought that open source was an important part of the future. They had given source code to some folks and had this Mozilla license that basically said if you fix something, you got to give it back to us. It wasn't as open as most open source licenses. And Mitchell Baker, the CEO of Mozilla, was also at Netscape. So Mitchell Baker is the first person that's not a nerd. She certainly is a geek, but she's not a nerd. Mitchell Baker is a lawyer by training. And so Mitchell Baker sort of created the legal structure for Netscape to interact with an open source community to build around Netscape. And as things with Netscape were kind of getting, the sun was going down in the Netscape empire, as it were, what happened was this little tiny underground open source movement around the Netscape product began to grow. And Brendan and Mitchell believed deeply in this notion. And even though they were Netscape employees, they started putting increasing amounts of energy into nurturing this open source community. And so it increasingly leaked out into open source. And Netscape sort of, so when it went down, it got purchased by America Online. Then America Online bought Time Warner, but then that kind of crashed. And all the while, more and more of the Netscape technology was leaking out into open source. And at some point, I've got to go back and get another interview. At some point, the powers that be at the Netscape /AOL /Time Warner are like, what is going on here? Why are you giving away our stuff? And Brendan and Mitchell kept giving away the stuff, and it got so bad that at one point they fired Mitchell and said, you go away. And so Mitchell was fired from Netscape, but she didn't stop doing the community management of the burgeoning open source activity around it. And Brendan hung on for a little while longer. And at some point, and it turns out that Mitch Kapoor, the founder of Lotus, is involved in this as well. At some point, Netscape was convinced that these are not the droids you're looking for, and just let it go. And that is what formed the Mozilla Foundation. So Brendan and Mitchell formed this nonprofit Mozilla Foundation. And it started out rather impoverished, but it did have source code to what formerly was kind of Netscape. They started to do some rewrites. My recollection of the early releases of the Mozilla browser were not all that great. But then they did this big rewrite of Firefox. It took them a long time. They did it very open source. They sort of embraced their open source culture. And it was pretty cool. And it turned out that about the so Mozilla was, Mozilla, the browser, It's the Mozilla Foundation, but the Mozilla browser was not a great browser. But what had happened by a little time passed, and the Internet Explorer, having defeated Netscape, started to get a bit lazy, right? And their browsers weren't so good. And Internet Explorer 3 and 4, 5 is like lazier and lazier and lazier and lazier. And finally, the Mozilla rewrite turned into Firefox was getting better and better and better. And the moment where that crossover happened also was the moment that we were changing the nature of hypertext markup language, the markup with castigating style sheets. And the problem was Microsoft sort of wasn't jumping on the bandwagon, but Firefox had done all the standards, filed the World Wide Web Consortium, and done all this stuff, and the Firefox thing that was about to pop was really a clean implementation because they had taken a long time. The other thing that was really clever was they put the search box up on a browser, so Firefox is the first thing to put the search box up. And at that point, when you would drive a search to Google, Google would give them some money. So all of a sudden, that little search box, and the fact that Firefox is really good software, and Internet Explorer was kind of, getting a little lazy and not keeping up with the trends, all of a sudden Firefox moved to like a 35% market share in a very short period of time. Mozilla was insignificant, but the rewrite of Firefox, coupled with the Microsoft downturn, and so now all of a sudden you're sitting on Firefox. All the Mozilla people, Firefox is the best thing since sliced bread. Probably 1/3 of you at least are using it right now. And money from Google is just rolling in. So they can expand, and they do all these things. They still are very, very much open source. So it's quite a story. It really is quite a story. And so I need to get you some more video on that. I mean, I'd rather not me tell you the story. I'd rather have people tell you the story, but I don't exactly have all the video for that right now. Hopefully in a future version I can get further stuff from both Mitchell and from Brendan. I mean, I know Mitchell, and we tried to get together so I can do an interview with her, but I just haven't connected because she travels all over the world. So just a thought bubble to make you think. Let's clear this. At the end of the day, did Microsoft save the World Wide Web? Netscape wanted to kill. Well, Netscape wanted to make it all proprietary. They wanted to own it. They wanted to own the browser. They wanted to define the protocols, all that stuff. They wanted to make the browser be a for-charge thing, and they threatened to make the desktop operating system irrelevant because we could write web applications, which we now do, of course, that are independent as long as there's a good browser on an operating system. And so I think a case can be made that Microsoft, even though they were simply protecting their turf, they basically made it so that Netscape's business model to sort of corner the web as a proprietary thing failed. A big part of why that is the World Wide Web Consortium. I mentioned earlier that in 1994, in October, Tim Berners-Lee left CERN and went to MIT, particularly because CERN did not want to become the center of the standards creation around the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee wanted to make standards, did not want to lose to Netscape, and also didn't want to lose to Microsoft. Right? They figured that if we would make standards, we'd put it all together. And so Tim Berners-Lee brought everybody together. I kind of mentioned there was a little tension between NCSA and CERN about the definition, but once folks realized how big this was, everybody worked together. Joseph Harden, who you've met, also was a co-founder, and so everybody kind of came together realizing that it didn't matter so much who'd created each little individual thing, but they had to take care of it. So the goal was, and Tim was the lead of it and continues to this day to be the lead of it and does a great job of that. And his goal was to develop standards to avoid proprietary balkanization of the web. So we didn't want like a this web and a that web. And every once in a while today, like, oops, here comes the iPhone and it does something a little bit different. And people are like, they're trying to balkanize the web. And so this is something we have to, even today, we have to stay vigilant. And so the World Wide Web Consortium tries to move interoperable solutions to like fancier graphics and curved buttons and all these little things, it's important that it evolve, and it evolve together so that all the browsers across all the vendors can evolve together, rather than letting one vendor sort of just sprint ahead, and then that eventually would lead to sort of a tipping point where you just kind of have to start using one particular browser. And again, just recently it seems like Chrome's got a bunch of, Google's Chrome's got a rapid increase in market share, and I think part of that's because there are things that work better with Chrome than don't, and that's a little disconcerting, that the reason that we pick a browser is because parts of the web work better with this browser than that browser. We want standards to lead the way. But going back to 1994, everybody was afraid of Netscape, and then when Microsoft jumped in, everybody was afraid of Microsoft. But really, if you think about it, probably the reason the World Wide Web Consortium worked was because Microsoft jumped in early. And people will complain about Microsoft and not doing this CSS or whatever. But in many ways, Microsoft is a fierce supporter of standards, a supporter of the development of standards. If Microsoft gets in trouble, it's probably because their browsers, there's so many of them, and there are so many old ones out there, and people are usually more angry. Everyone's angry at the latest browser to break in one little thing, but people are more angry about Internet Explorer 6, saying, well, there's a lot of Internet Explorer 6s out there. Well, that's the danger when you have such a large market share, the way that Microsoft does. But Microsoft, in my opinion, has been a good citizen on the web, has been a good citizen in the World Wide Web Consortium, and really has helped keep this wide open. I think there's good reason for Microsoft to want to do that. They don't want things to tip out of the interoperability spot. They got a good thing with their operating systems and SQL Server and SharePoint. They're doing pretty well, right? They do not have to sort of bend this whole web thing to the point where they win it. And there's other stories about where Microsoft has saved us. Sometimes they weren't imagining it, but even when they make a mistake, they make it in a big way, and everyone can jump on the bandwagon. So even the Ajax revolution, you could think of as Microsoft is what triggered the Ajax revolution that made the web like a zillion times better and more interactive. So the World Wide Web Consortium, and it is now time to meet Tim Berners-Lee. We don't have much footage of Tim Berners-Lee, and I didn't shoot this footage. Now we're kind of caught up to 1995. 1994 is the year of the web. Snap, bam, boom, all this stuff is happening in 1994. 95 is the year that everything is shaking out. Netscape, is not gone yet. So there's still a lot of shakeout going on. But at this point, all of society is pretty much aware that there's this thing, the web. This is when my television show started in late 94, early 95, throughout 95, 96, and 97. And I'm not going to ask you to watch my television show, but you can see a version of me that has a little darker hair, but you'll see that I talk the same way and I move my hands the same way. So it is indeed me, just younger, with more hair and darker hair. But we have a bit of film of Tim Berners-Lee caught at the December 1995 World Wide Web Conference. I think it was in Boston, actually. And you see a spark. And even if you see Tim Berners-Lee on a TED Talk today, this is 1995, so that's 15 years ago, at least maybe 18 years ago. But you see that this guy's just like got his feet in the future, right? And whatever we've done, that's great. But it's really about the future. So let's go ahead and meet Tim Berners-Lee as he talks about what it means when we can assume the web.